Mr. George Galloway will be sitting in this seat very shortly. Hello, sir.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you very much.
What's coming up with you?
Well, Boris Johnson's in trouble for telling the truth. Who'd have thunk it?
He said something about the Saudi Arabia.
He described Saudi Arabia in terms as a head-chopping, crucifying, human rights abusing tyranny, and by implication to which we shouldn't be selling guns and gas. Unfortunately, Theresa May was in the region trying to do just that. So they've made it known that he was not speaking for the government. He's only the foreign secretary, after all.
Oh dear.
So he survived telling all those lies, but may now come a cropper for telling the truth. And we've got the Brexit story, of course. It's in court, in the Supreme Court, and a by-election just yesterday, which was again largely fought on Brexit, non-Brexit lines, talking about Trump and all these weird appointments. Have you noticed that every person he's appointed has been a bald, white man?
I didn't want to say, but there was a pattern.
There is a pattern. You have to have less hair than Donald Trump in order to get
You have to be
cabinet,
follically challenged.
So we'll be talking about all of that and more.
All right, well, George.
Well, have we got a cornucopia in front of you this evening? There's some Italian pizza. There's some, I don't know, German bratwurst. There's a bit of European Union tapas. There's Donald Trump. There's a by-election in Sleaford. And there's Brexit. There's always Brexit. It's the mother of all talk shows. There have been few more shameful spectacles than what we witnessed over the last week from the British Prime Minister Theresa May, in case you'd forgotten her name. Theresa May was on tour in the Persian Gulf, in Saudi Arabia, and in various attendant satrapies. A woman who would not be allowed to drive a motor car in Saudi Arabia is allowed to be the British Prime Minister, although I doubt if they shook her hand for very long. But she doesn't mind that, because she wasn't there for a handshake. She was there to sell them guns and gas. She was there to sell them the means of suppressing their own population and of invading their neighbours. Yes, that's the same Saudi Arabia that beheads more people in 2016 than ISIS has. That's the same Saudi Arabia that is set to crucify in public a 17-year-old boy for going on a democracy protest. That's the same Saudi Arabia that is the grimmest tyranny in a region packed full of tyrannies. That's the Saudi Arabia that invaded Bahrain next door to crush the democracy protesters there. That's the same Saudi Arabia that are massacring innocents in Yemen, the poorest country in the Arab world next door. That's the same Saudi Arabia, which is universally acknowledged, although usually only in private, as the fountainhead of the Al-Qaeda ISIS phenomenon. The fountainhead of ideology and their particular bizarre, sectarian, fanatic take on Islam, a fountainhead of extremism, a fountainhead of weapons and money. Where do you think ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the other fanatic groups are getting the money that has fueled one of the most ferocious wars ever seen in the Middle East, which has seen many? Where do you think they get their guns? Where do you think they get their Toyota vehicles? Where do you think they get the knives with which they cut out the hearts of those who disagree with them, those who will not surrender to them, and then eat them? Theresa May was on tour selling weapons to these tyrants. And then what happened? Something you don't see often. Boris Johnson told the truth. Boris Johnson told the truth about these tyrannies. And what happened? He was to be immediately reprimanded, undermined. Everyone was told, off the record, that his days were numbered. The old gunsmith, Malcolm Rifkind, fresh from touting himself to mythical Chinese companies for a takeaway of hundreds of thousands of pounds whilst he was a member of Parliament, was trotted out in The Guardian this morning to say perhaps Boris Johnson should be moved to another job. And the whole caboodle placed in the hands of someone who won't embarrass the Prime Minister as she goes around prostituting our country and what's left of its reputation before any two-bit tyrant with a banknote, greasy banknote in his hands that he's prepared to let us have for the methods of death and destruction. It was utterly shameful. Now, I'm second to no one in my detestation of Boris Johnson. I recognise his abilities as a writer, as a raconteur, as an after-dinner speaker, but I think he's junk as a governor. But I will not stay silent while the threat of sacking Johnson for telling the truth is in the air. If he was good enough when he was lying, he's certainly good enough when he's telling the truth. It was utterly degrading and shameful to our country that our Prime Minister decided to treat her own Foreign Secretary in that way. He's not speaking for the government, they said. Well, he's only the Foreign Secretary, after all. It's been quite a week on other fronts too. As exclusively predicted here last Friday, Prime Minister Renzi of Italy crashed and burned to a landslide defeat in the Italian referendum by 60-40. He made it a referendum on himself. He told people, this referendum is about me. Even David Cameron didn't do that. But one of the reasons that Cameron lost the EU referendum was because a lot of people hated him and the Tory government that he headed. One of the reasons in every referendum for the result is that there are lots of reasons, not just the rather obscure constitutional issue that was before the Italian voters, but the impact of it is going to be enormous. The Prime Minister has had to resign. Whatever compromise they cobble together, they will not be able to put off an election for long, and the Five-Star Movement, a peculiarly Italian job, I may say, is almost certain to win those elections. And what's their number one platform? A referendum in Italy on leaving the euro. No wonder the knees were knocking at the European Central Bank, and the fat cats in the bureaucracy in Brussels were shedding a pound or two, sweating nervously about this next massive shockwave that's about to hit their doomed enterprise. A Titanic has just hit another iceberg in the form of the Italian referendum. You heard it here. The euro is doomed. The EU is doomed. We got out just in time. Or did we? Because, of course, there are people at the High Court right now. Well, not right now, because they've closed for the weekend. But they'll be back again on Monday, pressing the case for more legal obfuscation to try and block our passage out of the European Union. And there are many political forces at work, amply financed by all the captains of industry, all the gnomes of the City of London, most of the newspapers, most of the MPs, all of the civil service, the BBC, and all the other pillars of the British establishment that want to scupper Brexit. And Labour figures are now starting to come out from under the undergrowth and say that Labour now has to throw its lot in with the Liberal Democrats against Brexit. Beware, comrades, beware. That's the road to electoral suicide. Not that the road you're on now is very much better. Nobody knows whether you're for or against it. And the problem with being in the middle of the road is that you get hit by the traffic coming in both directions. Now, Professor Bob Watt, an esteemed professor of law from Buckingham University, specialises in electoral law. He also, by the way, submitted a legal complaint against the Leave campaigns for misleading information. And I wanted to talk to Professor Bob about how the Brexit case is going in the Supreme Court and what it all means. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Is this not a waste of the court's time now that the government now that the government have conceded that it will all go to a vote in Parliament anyway?
No, it's not, and I think the reason is that it raises a very important constitutional question, which is whether the Parliament has the right to decide on matters, or whether the elected government has the right to decide. It's about the width of the royal prerogative, which most of us thought had been declining since the 17th century, but the government seems to want to revive it. And the question is, should Parliament decide, or should the government decide? And the High Court said it should be Parliament, and the government want to dispute this.
Yes, but they've already in the interim said that Parliament will decide it.
Yes, but that's only on a one-off issue, isn't it? I agree it's a very important issue, the issue of triggering Article 50, but the point is that the Supreme Court case lays down a precedent for all future cases, and if we think back to the 1980s, we wouldn't think that the decision in the GCHQ case was unimportant, and that only decided a relatively small matter.
Well, I'm the last to defend royal prerogatives, as I don't believe in royals or them having any prerogatives.
Yeah.
But this case, of course, relates to a referendum of the entire British people. And it was they who made the decision to leave the European Union. And it's their wishes that surely trump, if you'll forgive the pun, trump everybody else.
Yes, but the problem was, and I think this is another aspect of the Article 50 case, the problem was that the referendum legislation was remarkably unclear. It didn't make the referendum binding. If that's what Parliament wanted, it should have done that. And they left the final decision up to, well, I would say Parliament. The government would say the government, and that is a matter that is a matter for decision.
So, I mean, you must be anxious about referenda as a general rule, then.
Yeah.
Well,
I am, and I suppose I'm anxious about referenda and elections as a general rule, because I think, and you mentioned the T word, and I think that's right. I think that the whole point is that both referenda and elections in recent years are becoming more and more. I suppose the only word is dirty. There are appeals to what's sometimes said to popular opinion, but I'm very concerned that these things aren't being run by the rules in the way that they used to some years ago. I think we're getting away from proper debate into who can shout the loudest and who can spin the facts as much as possible. And that does worry me.
Would it be fair to describe you as an elitist, Professor?
No, definitely not.
Do you know you're coming across, rather, as an elitist?
Why?
Well, you see, when you start talking about who can shout the loudest and who can spin the facts, what you're actually saying is that the voters are idiots.
No, I'm not.
Yes, you are. You're saying that they were somehow misled by loud voices or spun facts.
No, I'm not. I'm not saying that, because some of the people who I think did the misleading are certainly far more elite than I am, and I've got a lot more faith in people when they're given the facts to make a proper decision. But I think when
but you arrogate to yourself the right to decide what are facts and what is spin.
No, I say that is a matter for the courts.
That sounds pretty elitist to me. A matter for the courts. This was a referendum in which a record number of British people cast a vote. Why can't people like you just accept that you lost the referendum?
I haven't actually said which way I voted, have I?
Well, when you went to court to complain about the Leave campaigns, and what you've said over the last 10 minutes leaves me in little doubt.
No, what I have said, and I will repeat for you and your listeners.
Well, say it loud in case I'm stupid.
No, I don't think you are. No, I'm saying very, very clearly that when I looked, and when my colleagues looked at the, excuse me, when we looked at the things that were said, they were pretty deplorable on both sides. That's the first point. But we think that the Leave fell over the line into making misrepresentations of fact. The Remains fell over the line into making some pretty unpleasant misrepresentations of opinion. Now, if somebody thinks otherwise, and they think that the Remains fell over the line, I will give them my argument, which is quite a sort of, you could call it algebraic argument. It's extremely boring, and it's something the election nerds do. I will give it to them, and completely for free. And if they can find something from the Remain campaign that strayed over the line, they can send it to the DPP, to Special Crimes, and have exactly the same try.
Well, I gave you enough rope, Professor. The public will decide what you made of it. Thanks for joining us. That was Professor Bob Watt, Professor of Law from Buckingham University, specialising in electoral law, who also submitted a legal complaint against the Leave campaigns for misleading information. That's his take. Internal has sent me from the Facebook live stream. Chris Fuller says the Tories and the elite are taking the UK into dark times. The idiots voting for xenophobia don't realise they'll be left behind just like the rest. Then who will they blame? The left will be gone to defend us. And Alan McHugh, 64, says poor Boris is in so much trouble when Auntie May gets a hold of him. And John says, why do we continue to trade and sell arms with Saudi Arabia? The old adage about money talks holds good. As a country, we should bury our head in our hands in total shame. John, money doesn't talk, it swears. So on you go, Alec.
Hi, George. How you doing?
I'm good. Nice to hear from you. Go ahead.
Splendid. I'd like to talk to you about Boris Johnson, actually, if I may. I agree with you a great deal about the fact that on the one hand he's an odious character, but I actually think that will the real Boris Johnson please stand up? I don't know if you're familiar with the Chris Atkins documentary, Taking Liberties, from 2007. Is that one that rings a bell with you?
No. Tell me about it.
It was about Blair and the fixation with ID cards and surveillance and all of that sort of thing.
I remember all that very well, yes.
Well, indeed, of course we all do, but it's well worth digging out, actually.
Okay.
And in and amongst all of your usual kind of like, I don't know what you would call conventional left-wing objectors and agitprop kind of things, commentators about anti-ID card people like Mark Thomas and Tony Benn was on it, of course. God may God rest his soul. There was also Boris popped up and was a very, very powerful orator in favour of the libertarian kind of viewpoint, as in why do they need this stuff? He wasn't an MP at the time, and he really was a lone voice. So I suppose we all know what the criticisms of Boris are, but could he not be a force for good in this whole kind of, if he were to be sacked, then if he went kind of rogue and the real Boris Johnson, what do you think?
Well, he may be, of course, positioning himself to be sacked. After all, I don't think I'm alone. Certainly, if you read the Daily Telegraph, I'm not alone in thinking that a lot of Conservatives now realise that Theresa May really is a bit of an empty vessel. There's really nothing much there. The lights are on, but there's nobody home. And they may have missed a trick in not choosing Johnson, who at least has substance and colour and sparkle, all the things that Theresa May doesn't have. And that's being shown, by the way, if you look closely enough, every Wednesday at Prime Minister's Questions now, because Jeremy Corbyn is defeating her every single Wednesday.
And always has, yeah.
Well, and that's why you don't read about it now. It's why you don't hear about it. If she was knocking Corbyn for 6 all over the chamber, it would be top of the news, but you don't get any news on it because that's the opposite of what's happening. So it may be, because I agree with you, Johnson, like a stopped clock, being right twice a day, when he's right, he's got quite a chime. So he may have chosen this issue, Saudi Arabia, weapons, the Saudi tyranny, gay-hating, woman-hating. No, he didn't. And it is possible that he just let his mouth run off, because he does do that. But it's equally possible that there's method in his madness. What do you think?
In spite of myself, I do have a lot of time for him. Have you ever met Boris?
I know him very well.
Yeah, I have a lot of time for him. I mean, we disagree ideologically on a great deal of things. I mean, but it's like you can no more resent him for his background than you can for anybody else. I think he's a product in spite of his background, and I actually think that if it does pan out that he is,
you're not his little brother masquerading as Alec in Loughborough, are you?
Absolutely not. No.
Alex, thanks for that. I don't, as I said, I summed it up in my introduction. I think that he's a very fine writer. He's a good polemicist. He's a good classicist. He's a good raconteur. He's a good after-dinner speaker. But he's junk as a governor, as anyone who lived in London in his unfortunate and misnamed London mayoralty over 8 years could testify. David, on the other hand, is in Lancaster, in County Durham. Go ahead, David.
Good evening, George.
Is this the famous David Lindsay?
Oh, if you wish to put it like that, yes, George.
I do. I'm a big admirer of your work. Go ahead, David.
And I of yours. It was wonderful to meet you again
I saw you at we had a wonderful night in Darlington, didn't we?
It was splendid, and we had a very good conversation, you and I.
Yes.
And I'm just ringing in to say that I think the Labour Party should write up Boris Johnson's statement about Saudi Arabia and Yemen, frame it as a parliamentary motion, and table it. And then they could expose, because the last time there was a motion on Yemen, a large number of Labour MPs absented themselves, some legitimately, but many not, as you know.
Over 100. Over 100, David. Over 100 Labour MPs, as Manpreet Sambi has just pointed out to me in a tweet, over 100 Labour MPs failed to back the party's own motion against Saudi Arabian crimes a few weeks back. Over 100 of them.
Indeed, and if this were to be phrased simply in the words that Boris Johnson himself had used, this were to be tabled again, three-line whip, I would say. It should be made clear from the outset who had leave of absence and who didn't. I think that's quite possible with the present Chief Whip because he's a lot better than many of his predecessors.
Indeed he is, an old friend of mine.
And therefore they should be put to the vote, and then people would be able to see what was really going on.
Well, it's a very intelligent suggestion. You should communicate it to Nick Brown, as shall I. But it's worth making the point, David, that the last vote was a three-line whip too. So more than 100 Labour MPs, all of them moderates, almost all of them so-called moderates, the kind of people who used to cluck at anyone breaking the whip. Over 100 of them broke the whip in defence of the arms industry and Saudi Arabia. You really couldn't make it up.
No, indeed. And of course the situation now is that in the same way that they abstained over the welfare cuts, but eventually even Ian Duncan-Smith resigned over them, they have abstained over Yemen, but even Boris Johnson has now spoken out of turn on the subject. And therefore, just as they found themselves to the right of Ian Duncan-Smith, an inherently ridiculous position for a large number of Labour MPs, so they now find themselves to the right, if we can put it like that, of Boris Johnson on Saudi Arabia and Yemen. And that, I think, is a very good reason for the matter to be brought back to the floor of the House and to see exactly how they can possibly explain themselves this time.
David, I think you'd be a splendid addition to the floor of the House myself. Thank you very much, David Lindsay in Lanchester in Durham. Kirk St. Moritz says self-serving Prime Minister belittles self-serving Cabinet Minister who wants nothing but the top job at any cost. And Lee says, am I hearing things? Is that professor implying that democracy for the masses doesn't work? I'm stunned. Well, he didn't quite say that, Lee. He said that the masses shouldn't be shouted at and spin shouldn't be aimed at them. And if there's any question that that's what's happening, it should go to the courts. It was a very odd definition of democracy for a man who's a professor of law specialising in electoral law. Let me go on to read a few more tweets. Cabman says, so when Boris says something you disagree with, he's a liar. When you agree, he's telling the truth. That's great logic. Well, it's absolute logic. If he's saying something that's true, it should be said to be true. If he's saying something that's untrue, it should be called out as untrue. And that's all I'm doing, Mr. Stalker. Now, Cabby Man 63 hates me with an obsessional passion that has had me, and I say this to TFL if they're listening, I have had to report this man to the police as a stalker, and he's got a licence for a London black cab. He does nothing. I presume he's not got much trade in his cab. He does nothing but stalk me and stalk anyone who interacts with me. And now he's even listening to me on the radio. Go carefully, Mr. Cabman, won't you? Mike Hoxard says, but Boris Johnson has given his political detractors ample ammunition to have him elbowed out. Well, it looks like he is being elbowed out. Luke Senior says, the Saudi regime is disgusting. High time people were allowed to speak the truth on it and not be labelled cranks. And the 9 Dublin says Saudi owns 117 billion of US debt. Explains much. Indeed it does. Full Steam says, Theresa May looks like Thatcher, sounds like Thatcher, scratch the surface, and she's a fraud. And Kaz says, lol, she's a puppet dressed as a second-rate carbon copy of Thatcher. No future prophet, that's the name of the tweeter, says Boris will be Prime Minister within a few months. Now, some of you may be laughing at that, but that actually is quite an acute observation. That is not impossible. Now, he says he's no future prophet, and he may be right about that, but that prophecy may well come to pass. Now, speaking about prophets and prophecies, how could I pass up as my next caller, formerly of the parish of the Highlands, now in Newcastle? It's Ken. Welcome back, Ken.
We are George.
Very nice to talk to you. Go ahead.
Listen, about Boris, I agree with a lot of things you've said, George. And first of all, just 2 points. One, the first point about Boris Johnson. In my opinion, he's a man who speaks with a double tongue.
Yeah.
On one hand, he criticizes honestly, he's criticized Saudi Arabia, he's given an honest estimation of what he thinks on one hand, then on the other hand, he's supporting giving them armaments. This is a total double talk. If you're against Saudi Arabia, then there should be a complete halt to providing them with arms.
Yeah, although, to be fair, Ken, he's not the Prime Minister, and as she's just made clear, she makes that decision.
Yes, I understand that. But he should be an honest man. Although it's hard to find an honest politician, but anyway.
It is.
God knows about that, George.
Yes.
And about Saudi Arabia, George. Wahhabism is merely the re-emergence of 7th century Islam. I've studied Islam a wee bit. I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be, George. But with the Wahhabi theology, Wahhabism, it's the traditional Islamic teachings from the 7th century. This is the purest form of Islam, George, according to the Quran. It's following Islam as recorded in the Quran and revealed in Islamic history. We have to understand what's happening here.
Well, history and the Quran are two different things, of course. History is made by men, and men act in the name of prophets. And there have been many a crime. You yourself have drawn attention to me to some of them, committed in the name of Jesus. The Spanish Inquisition, Torquemada, et al. Were all carried out in the name of Christ. But that's
not according to prophecy, George.
Well, they were carried out in the name of Christ by the Christian church and its leaders at that time. And we don't blame Jesus for that.
Of course not, but listen, I never ever said to you those were prophecies they were fulfilling. The prophecies of Jesus, the teachings of Jesus, George, are to love your enemy, pray for those who despitefully use you. Now, do you know what the mission of Muhammad was? Do you know what his mission on earth? The mission of Jesus was to come and save sinners, to die for our sins and be raised from the dead that we could be forgiven if we repent to God and believe in Jesus. That was the main mission of Jesus, George, and you know that.
Well, I do. The mission of the Prophet Muhammad was to bring the word of God to the world, to build on the prophecies of previous prophets. That's what Muslims believe. And there's nothing in the Quran which in any way vindicates or authorizes the kind of barbarianism that we see in Saudi Arabia, and yet we're selling them guns.
Listen to this, George. This is quoting from Muhammad's words according to the Hadith, which is of the...
Well, now, just before you go on, you did say you weren't an expert, Ken. I am. The hadith by definition are not the words of Muhammad. A hadith is something that a companion of Muhammad later said that he heard the Prophet say.
Not so, George, not so.
Ken, a hadith by definition is a story told by somebody else, not by Muhammad.
It's a sworn tool of somebody else who heard Muhammad say these things.
Well, you know, he said, she said. You and I have met one or two on the corner who've told us that he heard she saying about him this or that. So don't quote hadiths at me, Ken, because there's thousands of them, and some of them have more weight than others. But if you want to talk about the Quran, go ahead.
Well, let me just leave you with this thought, George. This is supposed to be Muhammad's statement heard by somebody else. Mm-hmm. I have been ordered, now this is the mission of Muhammad, I have been ordered to fight with the people till they say none has the right to be worshipped but Allah. And that is the Ken, Allah is the Arabic word for God. Every Arab Christian uses the word Allah all day and every day. Don't you understand that? George, the Allah of Islam...
There's no Allah of Islam, Ken. There's only one God. You've obviously never met an Arab Christian. Maybe one will call up this evening to educate you. The word Allah is the word for God in Arabic. There's only one God. There's not a Muslim God and a Christian God and a Jewish God. Ken, you've reverted to type. You may have come down from the mountains of the Highlands, but you haven't changed. No, I'm going on. We're not going to be sidetracked with this. Paul in Manchester is up next. Go ahead, Paul.
Good evening, George.
Good evening to you.
Could I discuss Theresa May's visit to Saudi Arabia, please?
Yes.
Yeah, to sell them guns. I've always voted Labour all my life, so I'm not sticking up for Theresa May when I make this statement.
Mm-hmm.
If it was a Labour government that was in power, would they not do the same thing?
Well, the kind of Labour governments we've had, yes.
Yes, true. When everybody... when most people didn't know about Saddam Hussein and you were protesting against him.
Yeah, we were selling them weapons by the mountain load.
Yeah, including that super gun. And
yes.
They said it was the manufacturer said it was a sewer pipe or something.
Yes. Gerard Bull, his name was, now deceased.
Right. But, I watched on YouTube when you destroyed the people on Capitol Hill.
Mm-hmm.
With all the trumped-up charges that they were firing at you.
Yeah.
And it was comical, really, because you made mincemeat out of them. And, throughout the ages, we've sold people weapons.
Yes.
That's eventually been turned on ourselves, and all to make a profit, I suppose.
Yes.
So if it wasn't May, it would be somebody else.
Well, that's true, but here we have a situation where we're told that the greatest evil in the world is ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Yes. Saudi Arabia is the base for this ideology, for many of the fighters, and for most of the money. So are we right to sell weapons to people who then give them to the people we're fighting at home and abroad? The answer to that must be no, Paul.
Exactly right. I mean, the other thing is, slightly different subject, she didn't even wear a headscarf.
No, and they were probably horrified by that, but they certainly wouldn't have allowed her to get into the ambassador's car and drive it, because that's a crime punishable by public lashing in Saudi Arabia. Why are we even going there? Why are we even giving these people house room, never mind getting on our knees and crawling to them so that they'll buy some more weapons?
You're an expert on the subject. I must agree. Anything to do with that part of the world, you're an expert. And that guy who was talking earlier on, I don't think he had...
I was talking through his hat.
But that's another story.
Yeah. Okay, look, Paul, I need to press on. Please forgive me. I enjoyed talking to you. Thanks very much indeed. But I must go to Jason, because he's in Japan. Jason, welcome.
Hello, George.
Well, I just couldn't resist a call from Japan. The reach of talkRADIO is ever wider. Go ahead.
I've been here for 21 years, mate.
My goodness. How do you find it? I love Japan. I did a speaking tour of Japan.
I'm 47 now, and I've been here. I love this country. It's the best country in the world, to be honest. It's the last refuge.
Well, I must say I was very impressed by Japan.
And my wife's Japanese. My children, they're half Japanese.
Well, you haven't lost your accent, I must tell you.
No, I'm from the Midlands.
Okay, I could tell that. Now you're still staying in touch with the doings of Theresa May, because that's what you're calling about.
There are many points. I did call your persons earlier about this. On the list, anyway. It was I'm an ex-serviceman. I served in the Air Force for 6 years as an aircraft engineer, and my oldest brother did 28 years in the Air Force. And what bothers me is the people who wear poppies, as you mentioned in one of your last things on YouTube. And also, it was about Theresa May, basically. Then she's a Trojan horse.
A Trojan horse for whom, for what?
I don't believe that she wants to go through with Brexit, to be honest.
You're absolutely correct. Most of the government, most of the parliament don't want to go through with Brexit.
She does not want to do that. They're stalling this. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, they're hoping that it'll get so tangled up in the long grass that something will turn up. It's macabreism. Something will turn up.
That's the thing. She's in there. I don't know. Boris Johnson, I don't know what he's doing, but anyway, by the by, then what I want to say is, on another note, is that the £350 million for the NHS and all this kind of thing, blah, 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 then people don't understand that the government is in control of the money now.
I'll have to say sayonara, Jason, because I'm running out of time in this hour. But the government doesn't yet have the money because we've still got to keep paying it to Brussels. And whether it's 350 million or 200 million, it's hundreds of millions. And we can spend that when we leave the EU, however we decide. Now, Boris wouldn't have spent it on the NHS. Maybe neither might I. But it will be up to us to decide what we spend it on, rather than sending it every week, hundreds of millions, in a membership fee for a club that fails all of its members and benefits only the members of the committee. A neo-fascist got 48% of the vote for the presidency of the Austrian Republic just last weekend. A man from a misnamed Freedom Party who marches in the footsteps of another famous Austrian, a little one, with one ball and a little toothbrush moustache. That's what happened in Austria. But what's going to happen in the Netherlands? Never mind France, just across the channel. Geert Wilders, who is the goose-stepping equivalent of the guy who narrowly lost in Austria at the weekend, was in court today, charged with encouraging racial hatred in a tiny little country like the Netherlands that you can drive across in an hour or so. A tiny little country which contains within it some 1 million Muslims, many of whom are Moroccans. And in the dictionary, the Dutch dictionary, there are insulting, obscene swear words relating to Moroccans. They are the hate figures, the whipping boys, the scapegoats for every filthy racist in the Netherlands. And Wilders encourages it and wants to whip up hatred against them in order to fuel his drive for power. And he may well succeed. He was found guilty today, though there was no punishment at all, not even a token fine, never mind imprisonment or disqualification from office. Imagine a party leader who competes for power in the state is found guilty of encouraging, inciting racial hatred against about 1 million of his own citizens. Well, Mustafa is in the Netherlands, and though he says his English isn't that great, well, frankly, Mustafa, if there's any country on the European mainland that speaks good English, it's the Netherlands. So I'm sure you'll get by. Mustafa, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. What's the response to the conviction of Geert Wilders today?
Well, good evening, George.
Good evening.
Well, today Mr. Wilders got condemned of discrimination and group insulting. There's no actual punishment for this, but now he does have a crime record, and that's very funny for a guy who wants to be a prime minister of a country.
Yeah, maybe he'll find difficulty getting into other countries now that he's got a criminal record.
Well, let me say it like this. It would have been better that if we had observed this without the help of judicial power. That's very painful for the Netherlands, that we need a lawyer to say, look, this can't happen, this is not good, because racism is not an opinion, but rather a crime. Linking problems of the society to a ethnicity or a religion does not do any good things in Western Europe, and we didn't have learned something from the past, I think.
No, we've been there before. We've been there before. Your country indeed still has a royal family that ran away rather quickly, in Mr. Churchill's opinion, and surrendered rather quickly, and then a period of Nazi occupation in which many brave resistance fighters fell, but many Dutch were collaborating with the Nazi occupation and packing their own Jews onto the trains. So we know about fascism in your part of the world.
Yes, and the people who were collaborating with the Nazis were not Moroccans or Turkish people, because nowadays they are just asking us if you have two nationalities. They are just talking about where is your loyalty or where do you belong. Look, then I say always, we didn't work with the Nazis for 5 years and then get out the Jews there. We didn't do that. And if you look to the current situation now, I think I'm making myself worries, because the manner how he's talking about the judge, Mr. Wilders,
he said the judges were idiots.
It's very harmful. But if you think, George, which races in the history has been able to hold their own laws and judges? Who? He cannot conform the laws because he is going too far away. He's going too far, and then it's painfully to look to the future with a man like this.
Well, look, they failed, but very narrowly, in Austria last weekend. Will this strengthen Wilders electorally or weaken him?
I don't think that they will work with him, because they tried in 2010 to work with him for 4 years. They have to work here in a coalition, but it didn't work. They only could hold on it for 2 years, and now there's only one party, the Liberals. Well, many of them, the Liberals, have to be in the center of the political spectrum, but in the Netherlands they are right. I don't know why. They want to work with the...
Trust me, that's pretty common, trust me. Now, I don't really mean the other parties. What about the voters? Will this have increased his voting base or shrunk it?
I think he will be more popular by his own voters, but he won't get any help from the other people. I don't think so. I don't think that he will gain his popularity between other parties and other voters. Only his own voters.
Thank you, Mustafa. We'll see what other people think. Very good of you to join us, and your English was just fine. Ray from London texts, these High Court judges in Brexit talks now, are they the same ones who would have hung the Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4? Fair point, Ray. Probably not the exact same ones, although they never retire, do they? Massimo likes Coke, says, words are cheap unless Boris follows them through in his role. Well, of course, he would say that the Prime Minister makes the policy. Tegwin Half says, is Johnson now only just realising what Saudi Arabia is like? No, of course, he always knew what they were like, but it is interesting that he had the courage openly to say it. Ford says, how many years have people been complaining about Saudi Arabia? And I bet nothing will happen. Same old, same old. And Elsa says, underneath that jovial exterior, Johnson is a man that would pick his issue when sensing weakness in a rival. You might very well be right, Elsa. Maybe this presages, Marx's great truism that a cloud no bigger than a man's hand can be a harbinger of a great storm to come. Maybe Boris's apparently off-the-cuff rubbishing of the tyrants of Saudi Arabia was exactly that cloud, no bigger than a man's hand, but maybe there will be a great storm to come. Mal Simon says, to claim voters were misled is not a mere claim, it is true. Says who? Mr. Mal Simon. Now David is on the line in Glasgow. Let's hear from him. David, welcome.
Hello, how you doing?
Yes, good. Nice to hear from you. Go ahead. What would you like to say?
What do you think of the UK Supreme Court case?
Well, that's what we're talking about. I've said what I think, so you tell me what you think.
Well, I think everyone has just reminded that we are in a union, and it's not just England that occupies that union. Now, when I watched it, I've come to the conclusion that the Scottish Parliament could potentially...
David, you ask... David...
You going to let me finish?
No, I'm going to ask you a question. You see, when you ask your wife for a cup of tea, do you speak in that declamatory way? Do you say, Mrs., can I have a cup of tea? I'm just asking, I'm just interested from a human point of view.
I don't have a wife, but
okay.
Anyway.
All right, go ahead.
It appears that the Scottish Parliament could have a de facto veto. Now, say the Scottish Parliament does use that de facto veto and actually blocks the UK EU exit. Would you agree the appropriate thing would be a referendum on English independence?
Well, first of all, if my auntie had balls, she'd be my uncle. But she doesn't. That's why she's my auntie. There is no veto for Scotland in the EU referendum issue. Therefore, your absurd hypothesis falls at the very first hurdle. But if you get my drift, David, I've heard just about enough from you. Now, let me move on. FFA Cup Champs says, as a Western Australian Muslim, I couldn't agree more. The Saudi regime doesn't represent my Islamic values. Trotsky says, the nation is divided over Brexit, but the debate is abstract. Inequality is the issue, and only Corbyn has the politics to unite. So Mr. Trotsky wants the issue of Brexit to disappear. He has declaimed it to be abstract. Rory, I think, in Kentish Town, says, hi George, I despair when I see the likes of Theresa May strutting around countries like Saudi Arabia, selling arms to people that she knows only too well are more than happy to use them against innocent civilians in places like Yemen. The mind boggles at how these Western politicians are able to live with themselves, knowing the destruction that they are party to. It's a very good question. It's the John Lennon question. But how do you sleep at night? Now, Bob Stammer says the rule of law is essential, whatever the will of the people. He says will of the people in inverted commas. Bob Stammers, you too are an elitist. Asif. George, thanks for brilliantly dismantling the myth that the Saudi interpretation of Islam is an honest representation of the Prophet Muhammad. The Saudi government's perverse ideology is beyond contemptible, and we as a nation should not be engaging with them, let alone selling them weapons. Quite right, Asif, or kissing their backsides. Ken in Hertfordshire is back on another line, I hope. Ken, welcome.
Hi, is that me?
That's you, Ken. If you are in Hertfordshire, that's you.
Thank you. Yeah, a little bit nervous actually to speak to you, but it's a great pleasure to speak to you, George.
And you. Take your time.
The point I wanted to make was I think you're being a little bit naive about Saudi Arabia, not only Saudi Arabia, but the way states trade with other countries that have certain reputation, shall we say, that are not with the standards of the West or morality, i.e. that the morals behind it should be the most important thing. And we are talking about trading in billions of pounds, billions of dollars even. And so you have to make the decision whether if you're going to do that, you have to put your morals aside and do it anyway. I would make an example. For example, if you're say a contractor of something and you wanted to do a job for somebody who you knew was a disreputable person but was willing to pay you, say 2 or 3 times or maybe even more over the value, would you?
My goodness, we keep losing our callers. Let me respond, Ken, to what you've said so far, and if we get back to you, I'll let you, of course, complete the point that you wanted to make. First of all, the more you talked of our morals, the faster I counted our spoons, as the great Oscar Wilde might put it. Our standards, as you put it, are not standards to which I or any right-thinking person would consent. The facts are that however much money we are earning, or some people are earning, from selling cutlasses to throat cutters and head choppers, however much money that earns, I don't want any part of it. And no, I would not work for someone I knew to be disreputable because they offered me 3 times the amount of money that I was earning, where I felt the owner was not disreputable. I would not. But all of that is leaving out of the equation the fact that ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the mindset that they represent is an existential threat to us. It's not just that they're murdering Yemenis with our weapons. It's not just that they're murdering Bahrainis or murdering Saudis. It's that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are murdering us. And every weapon we give them is used for purposes which are directly and indirectly multiplying the existential threat to us and our people. So there's a self-interest here as well as morality here. Now, the case against the Saudi tyrants is so overwhelming. It's tiring that I even have to remake it. And don't tell me that if we don't sell them guns, other people will. Because that's the defense of every heroin dealer ever arrested by the police. If I didn't sell him the heroin, somebody else would sell him the heroin. Well, we'll have to arrest the somebody else too, and we'll have to jail them too, and we'll have to crush your evil trade. And that's the proper moral approach. But lastly, I say this: your standards and your morality don't stop you placing sanctions on all kinds of people. You put sanctions on Cuba for decades. Cuba's not running around the world cutting people's heads off. It's not running around the world threatening the very existence of our people. Get a grip of yourself, Ken, and get back on the line. Now, we seem to have sorted, touchwood, our telephone lines. So let's hear from Ken, who was cut off in his prime by a bad line, probably on our side. Ken, go ahead.
Thanks. I wasn't sure whether you could hear me at all, George.
No, I got your drift and I responded to it, but it's only fair to allow you to respond.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just reheard you actually on live talk, sort of ripping my point to shreds, which was
I'm sorry, Ken. All I can say is I would have done it to your face. It wasn't my fault that you disappeared. Go ahead, mate.
But I would like to draw you back to the point, because on the moral issue, where do you draw the line? Because you have to draw a line, I think. I personally do in my judgment in life, and I know you do in yours. Mm-hmm. But states don't seem to do the same kind of things individuals do. For example, the previous government would have done exactly the same thing as Theresa May is doing now in Saudi Arabia.
Crikey, that's not much of a recommendation, Ken.
No, agreed. But I would say that perhaps Jeremy Corbyn would also do exactly the same thing, perhaps in a more gracious way, shall we say.
There you're wrong, Ken, because he tabled a motion which more than 100 of his MPs failed to support, to suspend all arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And
I was unaware of that. Okay.
Yes, just a few weeks ago. And having known him for almost 40 years, I can assure you he would not. The one thing about Jeremy Corbyn, he's a man of principle. He's a good and honest man.
Yes, I've heard you say this many times, and I've no doubt you're absolutely right about that. But the point still stands: where do states draw the moral line about dealing with these kind of, shall we say, rogue states? And they don't. We don't. We haven't. We've had a long-standing relationship with Saudi Arabia for 100 years or so.
Well, we did invent it. We did invent it, of course.
Yeah, I think we did. In fact, yes.
But that isn't the point, really. Like the camel. This point is difficult to define but easy to recognize. If you have a state, a rogue state, which is so rogue that it is the base of your worst enemies, the worst people on the earth, Al-Qaeda, ISIS.
Yes, George, I've heard this point. I did hear the feedback on briefly before we got cut off. I heard that point, and I agree with you entirely about that. But if you bring it back down to a moral issue and bring money into the scenario, there doesn't seem to be any morals at all.
No, but money is involved. No, but there is law, and our law is clear. We are not allowed to sell weapons to people if there is a reasonable suspicion or a reasonable belief. That's the words in the law. A reasonable belief that state may use those weapons either for internal repression or external aggression. Now, in the case of Saudi Arabia, they are using them both for internal repression and external aggression. It's QED. I mean, it's game, set, and match. There is no lawful justification, never mind moral, for selling weapons to the Saudi dictatorship.
George, there's not much coming back from that, so I've got to go for a curry.
I wish you a very hot Vindaloo. Keith in Hertfordshire, thanks very much for hanging on and bearing with us during those technical difficulties. Let's squeeze John in before the break. John, go ahead.
Right, excuse me. Here we go. Quite simply, George, what do you think Boris Johnson is up to? Because Boris Johnson hasn't suddenly become the flag waver for human rights in Saudi Arabia. Is this Boris Johnson and his people launching some kind of coup d'etat against Theresa May because he still wants the big kahuna burger?
Well, you might be right, John. In fact, the question you pose, to be fair, is the question, and I don't have an answer to it. It could be either. Boris Johnson is a crackerjack kind of guy, and he's capable of firing off at one direction or another. The famous night that he agreed to join the Brexit campaign, he had already written an alternative article for the Daily Telegraph, arguing the precise opposite of that which he came down on. So it's possible that this is just a crackerjack running off at the mouth, or it's possible that it is a leadership bid. And if it's a leadership bid, I think he's chosen his terrain quite well. I believe that Theresa May could not justify to public opinion the line that she's taken on this subject. And that feeds into a sense in the public that I certainly myself feel that do we really have a Prime Minister at the moment? I mean, frankly, I'll be frank, having just said some nice things about him, I could say the same about the leader of the opposition. Do we have a Prime Minister? Do we have a leader of the opposition? It's like there's a hole at the heart of the political system. And inevitably, where there's quietude from leading figures, others will come out to try and fill the vacuum, don't you think?
Well, yeah, it's that I just think that Boris Johnson's only ever interest is Boris Johnson. He's coveted, and I use that word in its strict biblical sense. Leadership.
He's coveted a few wives as well in the biblical sense.
Well, Indeed. But he was always wanted to be leader of the Conservative Party and ergo the Prime Minister of Britain. And if it wasn't for Michael Gove, I think he would be the Prime Minister of Britain at the moment. And when he was given the job as Foreign Secretary, I remember you said, why don't they just give the gig to the Duke of Edinburgh and be done with it? I roared with laughter at that because it's true. But saying this, yeah, it's true. It's bang on the money. But why is he saying it?
Well,
why Boris and why now?
I suppose we'll find out. John, that was a very, very good call. Best of the night so far, despite our technical difficulties. Why did Boris Johnson tell the truth? That is the $64,000 question. And will he be sacked for telling the truth by a Prime Minister who doesn't want to know? She can't handle the truth. That's the truth of it. The Prime Minister and the state cannot handle the truth about Saudi Arabia being out there in the public domain. Now, we said we would tour the European horizon, and we have done so in a somewhat superficial way. We've talked briefly about Austria, about Wilders' conviction today in the Netherlands. We didn't yet get on to the possibility of the far right, the neo-Nazi National Front, and their candidate Marine Le Pen becoming the next president of the French Republic, the current president having limped off the field with precisely 4% in the public opinion polls in his pocket. So, enough superficiality. Let's talk to an expert. Professor of European Politics and Foreign Affairs at the prestigious King's College London, Professor Anand Menon. Professor, thanks very much for joining us.
No worries. How are you doing?
I'm good, and the better for hearing from you. Let's start with France, might we?
Yeah, absolutely.
The Gaullists have chosen Monsieur Fillon, who is more, you could say, more of a Thatcherite, more right-wing perhaps than at least the candidate he beat in the last ballot. Will that be enough to scupper the prospects of the Front National's candidate Marine Le Pen?
Well, what's the first thing you've learnt in 2016 is you never say never, so I'm not going to say that. And the other thing I'd say is you need to be a bit careful about left and right wing, because the attraction of the National Front is they're obviously what we call right wing when it comes to immigration and race. But their attraction to working class voters is partly for the fact that they're very left wing when it comes to economics. And that's where the danger is going to lie, I think, in next year's elections, because François Fillon has a very Thatcherite economic programme. And I think that might scare a lot of voters on the left. I'm not saying necessarily that they'll vote for Le Pen, but there is a possibility they will. So, I mean, one of the things that's happening at the moment is the traditional left-right thing is blurring and changing. And it's really, really hard to keep track of it because parties like UKIP, parties like the National Front are trying to claim the left-wing mantle.
You're right. You and I both know the ideological origin of this kind of Strasserism, brown shirt, anti-monopoly, anti-usury, anti-big business, pro-small business, pro-worker. This current existed in the Nazi party in Germany until Hitler murdered them all. And it's back in the form of modern neo-fascism in exactly the way that you described. But at the end of the day, Le Pen comes out of the Vichy, the collaboration, the neo-Nazi badge will surely be enough to ensure that all of the left, in all its various forms, which must be 25 to 30% surely of the electorate, will vote for Fillon rather than the proto-fascist.
Well, that depends, doesn't it? It depends on your situation. If you are someone that's worried about liberalisation of the economy because you think you might lose a cosy job that you've got that is protected under French labour laws, you might think twice. I mean, people's principles get challenged when they come into conflict with material well-being. And I think that's the calculations he's playing. But what you were saying about the 30s is dead right, because, you know, what did they call it? They called it National Socialism. And that's a weird combination, but it's a combination we're seeing again all over the place.
We are. And is the virtual disappearance of the French Communist Party, which was once a mighty organization with big parliamentary presence in the government, very popular leader Georges Marchais, a mass trade union base, thousands of councillors, many mayoralties, some of them for 60, 70 years. Yet that party has virtually disappeared. Is it true that some of their voters are going to the far right, Le Pen, on the basis that you've just been describing?
Oh, it's absolutely the case that in working class towns in France, more and more traditional left-wing voters are fleeing to Le Pen because they see in her something that will protect them from globalization and someone who appeals to the anti-foreigner prejudice that is sometimes in these kinds of towns. So, yeah, absolutely. And, if you think about Britain, what has Paul Nuttall said? He said, next target, Labour seats. So, this isn't a phenomenon that's confined to France. In France, they're doing the best electorally.
What about the rest of the continent? The German political system looks to me stable enough to repel the right-wing, very right-wing rise of anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim forces there. But not necessarily everywhere else. I mean, what in Italy, for example, what is this five-star movement? Is it left? Is it right? Is it both? And yet they seem, one of your colleagues in your college said to me on my television show for Saturday that this five-star movement, under the current electoral law, would win the election. So who are they?
Well, they're a hodgepodge. When you say, are they left, are they right, are they both? I'd say both. They are what we see more and more commonly in politics around the world at the moment, a sort of anti-system, anti-establishment party, which, remember, is how the government that's governing India at the moment came about. The BJP was an anti-establishment force. So it's happening all over the place. Now, I think my colleague, whoever it was, is right. Under the current rules, they would win an election. But I think what we'll find in Italy is that they'll change the rules before they have an election to make sure.
Yeah, she said that. She did make that point.
All right. Yes. Well, we're of one mind.
She did make that point. But that in itself will have a political cost, won't it? Because that will further alienate people from the establishment. Oh, look, they've moved the goalposts. They've changed the rules just to stop our people from winning.
Absolutely, and that, in fact, happened in France earlier this year because the National Front effectively won the regional elections in the first round. And what happened in the second round was the equivalent of Tories and Labour in France said, we'll do a deal and we won't stand against each other, so they lose. And, of course, what the National Front said was, see, it's one establishment and you need to vote against them. So every step you take builds up the longer-term problem. But, I mean, as you must know, because, you're a politician, politics tends to be about the short term. So people think about the next election, not the one after. Mm-hmm. So we store up problems for the future.
And problems there are because my take on it, I don't necessarily invite you to share it, is that the neoliberal project, austerity and the rest, is collapsing in front of our eyes. And the liberal attachment to that project, the Hillary Clintons, and to some extent the Blairites in the Labour Party here, they're disappearing down the plug with them. The problem is there is no alternative project on the left for people to adhere to, even if they were minded to.
Well, I mean, I disagree with some of your language, but let's not get all pedantic. I think you're absolutely right. The centre-left is disappearing. And that's a real issue for those who think that the rise of the far right is a real problem, which I think. And I think the roots of it are complicated. There's a sort of complex mixture of two things for me. One, the fact that politics has become a middle-class sort of clique, that basically we pander to the middle classes to win enough votes and we forget about the people we can forget about. And it's the forgotten people that revolted in America, and they revolted in our Brexit referendum as well because politicians had ignored them for so long. Second thing I think is a sort of anti-establishmentism, if you like, a notion that we are governed by a bunch of people who are in it for themselves. They've got their snouts in the trough. They're all mates with Goldman Sachs. And essentially, we just want something different. And we're, the saddest indictment of our politics, I think, if you look at Brexit and you look at Trump, whatever you think about what those two things mean, is that loads of people were willing to take a punt because they were so unhappy with what was on offer in mainstream politics.
Indeed. In fact, we share many commonalities in that we might have different solutions. Jeremy Corbyn, Mélenchon in France, the Die Linke in Germany continue to fly red flags, but at the moment not that many people are marching behind them.
No, that's absolutely true. And I mean, Corbyn's one of those I know. Well, I don't know Corbyn himself, but I sort of look at the Labour Party more than I look at the other two. And I think, in all those movements, I get the sense that there are people who aren't in it to win elections. They're in it to, as they put it, build a social movement. And in a sense, it's a kind of anti-politics in party form. There are people in the Labour Party who say, well, we lose an election, it doesn't matter, because actually that's not the aim here. So, what's different in Britain is that sort of movement has taken over what was the mainstream centre-left party. So there is none now. And remember, in large parts of Central and Eastern Europe, party systems aren't like ours. Party systems are a centre-right party and a far-right party, and that's it. So, there are other models of politics that, if you're of the left, are far, far less sort of appealing than the traditional ones.
Well, lastly, a measure of the collapse of, let's call it social democracy, if that's acceptable to you, is summed up by President Hollande not even being able to stand for a second term, and his popularity ratings down at 4%.
I know, absolutely. I mean, it is an intriguing situation where I find myself 4 points behind the incumbent for the French presidency, which is, interesting in many ways. Yeah. But you've got to bear in mind, with politics, there are two issues, aren't there? There's the message and there's a messenger. We found that with Ed Miliband. A lot of Ed Miliband's ideas have suddenly become part of this Tory government's message, if you were to believe what they say. But no one liked the messenger. And I think that's partly the case with Hollande, that the French have not just not liked his policies, but they found him fundamentally uninspiring. So to win in politics, you need to have a set of policies that people like and someone to spell them out that people feel would be a good leader. And Hollande just hasn't passed those tests.
Professor Anand Menon, you're a star. I hope we get to talk again. Thanks very much. Absolutely. That was Professor Anand Menon, Professor of European Politics and Foreign Affairs at King's College London. Tweet at George Galloway or at talkRADIO or both. Liz McCann has. With Labour in its current form, we will only get right-wing tax cuts for the wealthy and more austerity. And Ford says, it makes me laugh since Brexit, EU citizens have been getting racist abuse, but EU citizens are some of the most racist people. And Jane A. says, it seems to me that Muslims will be the scapegoats for all ills, George. And Keno says, Tories are heading for a split. Right-wing Labour will join pro-EU Tories. I can't wait for that. No, I'm not sure entirely about that. Tories might not split, but they might change their leader. Let's hear from Z in Brighton. Go ahead,
Hello,
Z.
George.
Yeah.
Hello, George. I have hope you're well.
Yes, by the grace of God, I'm great.
My question is about Boris.
Yeah.
So my question is, if Boris criticizes Saudi Arabia, does that make him an anti-Muslim or anti-Islamic?
No more than criticizing Israel makes you anti-Jewish.
So why, if Boris had made, so my comment is, if whether people agree or don't agree with what Boris was saying, I think it's fair to say that most people would agree that he's not anti-Muslim for making the comment that he made. It was a criticism of the Saudi government. So why is it that the media don't apply the same principles when people make a comment about the Israeli government? And I'm not saying, and I agree with most of what Boris has said, so I'm not trying to deflect people from that, but I just want to understand why there's such hypocrisy and why are politicians scared to make any criticism of Israel?
Well, because this is an organized hypocrisy rather than an organized democracy. And everybody knows, let's stick to Saudi Arabia now, everybody knows, from Her Majesty the Queen down to a private in her guard, everybody in Parliament, everybody in the civil service knows that the Saudi regime is a blood-soaked, barbaric, medieval tyranny of kleptocrats and hypocrites. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows, and everybody knows that one day they will be swept away by revolution. Everybody knows that. What's happening here is we are kissing their noses, kissing their backsides, in order to get some of their money in exchange for whatever we can flog them. And even when, and this is the point I made earlier, you can say, well, we're trading with them, we don't like them, but we're trading with them. You can say that. But if what you're selling them is actually making stronger people who are out to destroy you, well, that's just madness. And that's what we are doing. Saudi Arabia is arming, financing, propagandizing through its control of most of the Arab media, Saudi Arabia and the other satrapies around it. They are supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in every conceivable way. And ISIS and Al-Qaeda are coming here to kill us. So why would you want to make stronger a regime that is doing that? Z.
Yes.
Respond, please.
George, I agree with everything that you've said there. The only thing I'd like to add is the point that I made, in that if people criticize any government to want to make them better, then we shouldn't tarnish people with the brush of you are anti-Muslim or you are anti-this or you are anti-Semitic. We need to be consistent.
Yes.
We need to be consistent.
Indeed,
and
we do.
Consistency is the thing that I have a problem with, in that the media don't hold people to account on the same basis.
You're quite right. You're absolutely right, Z. Consistency is my middle name. Here's Guy in Blackpool. Go ahead, Guy.
Oh, hi, George. Great honour to talk to you.
Thank you, sir.
I've been a fan of yours since you wrote me a very nice letter when I was at school. I tweeted you about it a while ago.
How wonderful. Thanks, Guy.
I was just ringing on sort of similar grounds to the last guy that you spoke to, about the kind of bumbling buffoon who's masquerading as our foreign secretary.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just interested when you said that it's illegal. We're not supposed to sell arms if they're used for internal repression.
That's right.
Or
the campaign,
aggression.
Guy, the Campaign Against the Arms Trade, CAT, a wonderful organisation, they're bringing a court action against the British government for judicial review on exactly that point. We are in breach of our own law selling weapons to Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. And surely by the same logic, we've been in breach of our own law for years by selling arms to Israel.
Well, you don't have to persuade me of that one.
Well, I just think it's interesting that there's such fury around Saudi Arabia, but people seem to be forgetting that we're doing this in other places across the world.
And in many places historically, we sold weapons to Saddam Hussein. We sold weapons to Colonel Gaddafi before we killed both of them, and before many of our own people were killed in the process of trying to get rid of the Iraqi regime that we built up.
Absolutely. It's a shambles.
Hypocrisy is the middle name.
Absolutely. Get back in government.
Well, I'll do what I can. Thanks, Guy. Very
Thank
lovely
you very much.
call. I appreciate it very much. Vinegar2 says, does the job go to the person who appears to be the most ridiculous these days? And an SMS says, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on Trump and Palestine. Well, another time, yeah? Salman Khan says, we sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, and then Saudi Arabia gives the weapons to ISIS. So it's like we are selling weapons to ISIS. Blinding logic, Salman, and absolutely correct. Ford, again, says, you're so right. We are like the local drugs dealer. If we don't sell it to Saudi Arabia, someone else will. Shame on us. And Simon James says, arming Saudi Arabia only serves the agenda of those who seek to divide and conquer. And Seram00 says, please discuss the violation of the Dutch referendum on the Ukraine. Oh, well, another time. Perhaps. Jim is in Brighton. Let's squeeze him in before the news. Go ahead, Jim. Jim? Unfortunately, the gremlins have got him. That was Jim in Brighton. We'll get back to him later. Let's try line 2. Jim, are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry.
No, it's our fault. Go ahead, sir.
Yes. George, a slightly separate issue. In this year, we rejoined the Labour Party for obvious reasons with Jeremy Corbyn for the first time since 1996, 97, God forgive me. And I'm having an issue in myself, and so is my wife, in that the subscriptions to the Labour Party, I'm sort of feeling, should we be subscribing each month direct debit to the Labour Party when it's going to a bunch of backstabbers as well as Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell? I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, you should continue to be a member and therefore pay, at least for the foreseeable future. But what lies beyond the foreseeable future, of course, is another matter. Perhaps I'll dilate on that later in the show if I get the chance, or perhaps on another occasion. But there are serious problems in the Labour Party. The failure to support the motion to impeach Tony Blair was a very dangerous mistake by the Labour leadership, because it reinforced the old synonym that Labour equalled Blair and Blair equalled Labour. And this error has more than symbolic value, in my opinion. The silence of the Labour Party on many important issues, but most importantly on Brexit, where it is in the middle of the road and therefore being deserted by supporters of both sides, supporters of Brexit to UKIP, supporters of Remain to the Liberal Democrats. No clear Labour position, because they all have different positions at the top in the Labour Party. The gross error that they are making in relation to the issue of freedom of movement could lead, as it did in the by-election in Sleaford yesterday, to electoral disaster, at which point there will be another coup. And Corbyn will be out, and if they haven't changed the rules, then no person on the left will be able to run for leader ever again. At that point, should those hypotheses all come to pass, Jim, there would be absolutely no case for being in the Labour Party, and something else would have to emerge. That's the best I can do in 60 seconds or 90 seconds. What do you think?
Yeah, well, it's that, I feel sort of desperately sad in that sense. Even in the sense that when, as you called him, when he trounced Where's Wally recently,
yes,
the fact that they haven't got behind him in any sense, with an election maybe 3-4 years away, they thought, well, this is what we have, let's get behind the man. At the very least.
That's not the sort of people they are, Jim. They support Jeremy Corbyn as the rope supports the hanging man. Now, in the interests of full disclosure, I travelled to Darlington by train this very week for a very successful event. Big hi to all my friends up there. And it was a very pleasant journey. But then I was first class. Further down the pecking order, below the salt, it was probably not quite so convivial. And that's nothing compared to what's happening to the people who have to travel on Southern Rail. It is, quite without any challenge, the worst railway franchise in the country or ever given, ever in history. The commuters are revolting. Well, one or two of them are with the gin and tonic and so on, but they're all revolting, even the good ones, at the service that they are getting. And the labour relations within the company have reached rock bottom. And the demand is everywhere. There's hardly any place where it's not coming from, is for a new change, a reform, a fundamental root and branch reform of Britain's railway industry, which is this hodgepodge where the country owns the track and we give the subsidies beyond the dreams of avarice to third-rate private companies to run the service on our rails. If ever an industry was screaming out to be nationalised, it is the railway industry. After all, They're our tracks. We built them. It was our investment that created our railway network. Why should we give 3 times the amount in subsidy to privateers to run carriages along the top of our rails than we ever did to the, I think, unfairly traduced British rail? Sure, it had its shortcomings, though its breakfasts were fantastic, but it had, I think, a touch of class. I don't believe that the private operators have kept up to that class. But I'm not an expert. Bruce Williamson is. He's with the campaign group Rail Futures, and the story, of course, is pegged on the issue of Southern Rail lodging a legal appeal in a bid to prevent further industrial action by its own workforce. It has lost control of the labour relations situation. And, of course, it's a byword for lateness and cancellation. So let's hear what Bruce has to say on this whole picture. Bruce, thanks very much for joining us.
Good evening, George.
Just summarise, if you would, the state of play on Southern Rail, first of all.
Well, it's a shambles, isn't it? I think you've summed it up quite well. Industrial relations have sort of gone from bad to worse, and Southern are very much the villains of the piece at the moment. And as you rightly say, when it comes to a company going to court to prevent its own workers from striking, then things have gone very badly wrong, haven't they?
Indeed, and it's not just the labour relations, is it? Although the management appears to have mishandled that. Why can't they make the trains run on time? Is it the sheer scale of the commuter land, the number of passengers, what?
There's all sorts of factors involved. There's decades of underinvestment. There's the fact that railway numbers, passenger numbers, have doubled in the last 20 years, and we haven't matched that with a doubling of the number of carriages or rail lines or stations. So inevitably you have to cram more and more people into the existing rolling stock that we have. And whilst there is some investment going on the railway, which is very welcome, it's not really keeping up with the ever-growing demand, despite the government's best efforts to price us off the railways by increasing fares every year.
Yes, exactly. Onto roads which are environmentally damaging, more and more jam-packed, accidents everywhere, and so on. It all highlights the complete lack of a national transport policy, a national plan for transport. And that, of course, is a product of privatisation, isn't it?
Well, I think privatisation has certainly thrown an extra level of complexity into the whole sort of railway network, and I would certainly agree that there has almost never been an integrated national plan for transport, which would be a good thing, actually. There is, in terms of investment, what we're suffering from is stop, start, feast and famine, and there is, as you probably know, electrification going on the Great Western Main Line, which has stalled. That's in no one's interest, and I have grave concerns about that, particularly as they haven't given us a date or any indication when it's going to be unstalled again. So we'll have the sort of the fiasco of these lovely shiny new electric trains going halfway to Bristol and then switching to diesel, which is not ideal.
No, not ideal. And of course, all the while they're pressing on with HS2, which will affect, of course, only one line, whilst the rest of the trains are running late and packed and overpriced.
Indeed, but I mean, the HS2 is an example of a new line that's going to increase capacity, and we need that. Part of the problem is caused by the lack of capacity. As I mentioned earlier, we haven't had a doubling in the number of lines in the last 20 years, whilst we have had a doubling of the number of passengers. So clearly something's got to give. So new lines or alternatively reopened lines are always very welcome, but I don't want to sound sort of like a greedy kid in a sweet shop, but it's never enough. You know what I mean?
Of course I do. Now, I've met some gin and jag golf club bores on Southern Rail who are nonetheless fully converted to the idea, Jeremy Corbyn's idea of renationalising the railways. Where does the campaign stand on that?
Well, we're sort of neutral, but I mean, I certainly recognise that nationalisation is a popular policy, or renationalisation is a popular policy, and certainly there would be some advantages, well, undoubtedly quite many advantages in having an integrated whole. You'll be aware of the recent announcement of Chris Grayling that he's going to kind of go halfway to doing that in terms of integration, but going in the opposite direction by allowing the train operating companies some control over the maintenance of the lines in their patch. Now, that idea has some merit because, like I say, very obviously, track and train go together. They inevitably do. So if you're managing them together, that has some natural advantages. However, my concern on the other side of the fence is that we're introducing an extra layer of bureaucracy in the railway network as a whole, and also we run the risk of further fragmenting Network Rail. Because obviously you'll have to have a Network Rail representative in every franchise region of the country, and this has been tried before. There have been two experiments, two schemes. Southwest Trains had a sort of alliance with Network Rail. I think it was called the Southwest Trains Alliance, and similarly it's been tried in Scotland. And like I say, it's an obvious idea. You integrate track and train, but on both those examples, it hasn't proved particularly successful and has been quietly dropped. So I fear the same may happen with this idea.
I don't just fear it, I'm certain of it. You're a gentleman and a scholar. Thank you very much, Bruce Williamson of Rail Futures, the campaign group on the crisis on British railways. Let me go to the tweets. Danny Phillips, of course. Johnson is making a play for May's job. Only David Moyes wouldn't have seen the difficulty in taking on the Brexit poison chalice. Well, I don't agree with that. David Moyes is a very fine man. Salman says, my goodness, Boris Johnson, the flag bearer of human rights. Talk about comical. Well, comical he does rather well. Who in our government is facilitating the Saudis? Asks Adam Davies. Well, I sometimes wonder if there's money changing hands somewhere in the political system, I must tell you, and I never thought I'd find myself saying that. Here is Mohammed in Birmingham on Saudi Arabia.
Hello. Hello, George. How are you?
By the grace of God, I'm good. Now, you're from Kuwait, Mohammed.
Very well.
So
I'm very good.
What would you like to say?
I'm calling you. First, I have to say for you, hello. And I'm from Kuwait, actually. I'm not from Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
I did indeed make that point. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. How are you, firstly? I don't want to ask you two questions. You know this already. But I would like to ask you about your position about Saudi Arabia now with Yemen. And I would like to ask about Donald Trump and Tony Blair. That's it. Why he attacked
Well, that's a big that's a big question, Mohammed. Okay. Look, on Tony Blair, you'll need to buy my movie, which is called The Killings of Tony Blair. It's available from HMV, iTunes, Amazon, and all good retailers. So I can't rehearse all that case now.
It's all right.
Donald Trump, if his foreign policy is as he said it would be during the campaign, and as he repeated it would be in the last 24 hours, it will be
he can control America?
It will be a better foreign policy than the one we've been living through. It will be one in which the United States, to quote Donald Trump, is not running around the world trying to change regimes, backing anyone who will help bring down a regime, even if the people they're backing are worse than the regime they wish to bring down, and an end to the growing confrontation with Russia. That's what Trump says his foreign policy is, and if it is, that'll be good for everybody, including the people
George, why
of
you
the United States.
I would like to tell you something. You're my idol, firstly. And I watched your video before in 2007 and 2006. But many people in Arab, they don't have an English language. You know that already.
Yes,
like Saudi Arabia, like Kuwait, Emirates, Oman. Why don't translation your video? Because a lot of people, they love you. Opposite than here. Some people here, they say for you, say for me, why you watch this crazy? I said, this guy, they say truth. Why? That's the reason why I watch
Mohammed, I love you for that, and I'm very grateful for it. And my Abel Jr., my political secretary, is sitting just a few feet away from me now, and he will put that into practice. We'll get Arabic translation on all the main videos, and you can claim credit for it. Thanks very much, Mohammed, and safe journey on your travels. In Liverpool, Mark, welcome.
Hello, George, mate. You all right?
Yes, great, thanks. Nice to hear from you again. Go on.
Yeah, hey, one very quick thing. Ever guess what's on the box?
Tell me.
You know, the Scorsese movie, Direction Home, about Dylan.
Oh, yeah, very good. I like that. I hope that's been taped for me, as we used to say. But that,
yeah, and
of course, there's no tape involved now. Yes, thank you very much.
Now, listen, I've struggled over this, and I'm not happy with the conclusion I've come to, but I like to try and get things definite in my head, right?
Yeah.
And listen, I'm open to be changed. I am. I'm on the line with it. But I've changed in the way I think. It happened a few years ago. Now, I got that much in the States, and I had that much beef with what was happening in the world. I seen how people were that much overlooked, and then I brought it further back closer to home. And in the end, right, I don't vote for me, George. I vote for my community. I vote for the issues of what's going on around me. Now, that doesn't mean, like, what's happening in Saudi Arabia is abhorrent and we want it to end. But the trouble is this. Now, God, I feel so bad saying it, but main thing in my mind is I want as much work in this country as possible. Mm-hmm. And the way we're going with this headlong decline, race to the bottom, and low wages, and once these robots and all this automated life starts in, we're going to have to hold on to everything. Now, I know it sounds selfish, mate, but it's not coming from a selfish place. But I am most bothered about what happens in our workplace, in our communities in this country at this present time.
Well, you're absolutely correct. It is the duty of British political leaders to look out, first and foremost, for the workers and the citizens in Britain. What happens in other countries is the responsibility of their political leaders. And we have a responsibility to defend ourselves, to defend our borders, but to defend that which makes us strong and can make us fair if we elect a government committed to fairness. There's no point in endlessly campaigning, for example, about the NHS if you have no industrial strategy to produce the wealth that will sustain an NHS. To fail to do that is just liberalism, and there's too much liberalism in the country. The idea that all you've got to do is embrace this identity or that identity, give them a cuddle, have some soft words, get a teddy bear called Ahlan, and get a refugee and put it in your loft. This is no solution. There are refugees because there are wars. We're creating the wars. Stop creating the wars. Stop creating the sinews that keep dictators in power who oppress their people so that their people have to flee and look for a house in our community. Stop pretending that in a capitalist society, free movement of labour is anything other than a recipe for driving down wages, driving down conditions, putting pressure on rents, on school places, on hospital appointments, on the creaking, crumbling, groaning infrastructure that the capitalist system has left us with. Don't tell me when you're living in an ivory tower with your espresso macchiato, as so many are, that Brexit is racist, that Remain is the left-wing position, because it just ain't. And it doesn't look that way from the north. It doesn't look that way from the Rust Belt that used to be our manufacturing hive, sparks flying, great things being manufactured, ships that sailed the seven seas, buses, trains, cars, motorbikes, all the things that we used to do, using our own steel, our own coal, and the skills of our own people. We've got to get back to that, Mark. There's no living to be made selling ice cream to tourists. We can't all live on bloated, artificial house prices that spiral us ever further into debt. How's that for an answer?
Well, it was a good answer, obviously.
I'll quit while I'm ahead, Mark, and go to Michael. And go to Michael in Slough. Go ahead, Michael.
Hello, George.
Hi, mate.
I'm a long-time fan.
Thank you, sir.
And I've plucked up the courage to phone you, right? Because there's a thing I want to get off my chest. It's been bothering me for ages, right?
Okay.
Is the bias that we see towards the right-wing point of view in the media. Every television every program you see on the television has a panel of experts, right? BBC have the same old faces, regurgitating the same old, as if there's no other answer. Even when their point of view is failing, which is powerfully failing, they're still peddling it as if it's the answer to everything.
Well, I think you've summed up. You've summed up the situation with great clarity and eloquence. So there was no need for you to be nervous. But the good news is these experts have fewer and fewer listeners and takers for their expertise. That's the meaning of the Brexit result. That's the meaning of the Trump result. That people, when they're told by our political class and their comprador of experts that today is Friday, they instinctively look at the calendar to establish whether or not this is another lie. So the political class and their media echo chamber are so discredited that, first of all, fewer and fewer people are turning on to them. Even those who do believe less and less of what they see, hear and read. And other forms of media are multiplying like topsy. That's all the good news, Michael.
I agree with that, George. And if you're politically motivated, you look for these. But the vast majority of people, the vast majority of voting people are not. And they look towards the same, and they're well aware of this, they look towards the same programs, and these programs consistently have a right-wing bias.
Yeah.
You get one sort of person sticking up for the left-wing point of view, and you'll have two right-wing people sort of shooting them down, and, saying, we've only had three. I forget his name now. He was on, I think it was today, he was on the political program today.
Andrew Neil's show.
Andrew Neil's, and he's saying to somebody, we've only had three left-wing governments, and blah, blah, blah. And, and I'm thinking, hold on a minute, the whole face of everything is changing, and you're still trying to deny what's going on, You have, look, who could predict Trump in America?
I did.
Predict Brexit. All these.
I predicted both of them because my finger is on the pulse and their finger isn't. Take a look at Question Time, Michael. Question Time has become a caricature. I mean, first of all, it's time for Dimbleby to go. I don't know whether it's age or what it is, but he's just lost the plot. Every week is a Corbyn snide. And every week, the panel becomes more and more right-wing, and the audience becomes more and more right-wing. And we discover, just in case you don't know it, that one of the people charged with the task of picking the audience has far-right sympathies and was caught doing her best to get far-right people, EDL, BNP-type people, into the audience. It is a caricature of what it was supposed to be. And I'll tell you something, Michael, Andrew Neil would run it a lot better than David Dimbleby's running it.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, I'm impressed with him. I'm impressed with his level of...
Yeah, he knows.
He's consistent.
Yeah,
he knows his topic.
He's the only person, Michael, that ever interviews me that knows and I know he knows at least as much as me about the subject that we are discussing. Secondly, he gives me a hard time, but he gives everybody a hard time. He gives Tories a hard time, Labour a hard time, left, right, centre, nationalist, unionist. He gives everybody a hard time. And that's what we need in the chair of Question Time.
Sorry, just one more thing before I go, George.
Yeah.
Is this right? Corbyn can't get his message out because he's consistently betrayed by the fact that they have people, supposedly Labour, but it's not Corbyn's Labour, it's Blair's Labour, still peddling his nonsense, right? You know, he won 3 elections, as if, listen, anybody with any political awareness, aware of after Thatcher, anybody could have got elected, right?
He lost 5 million votes, Michael, between 1997 and
it's
2007.
what he did for his core supporters.
Exactly.
He did nothing for his core supporters.
Nothing. He hardly built a council house. Hardly built one council house
never
in the
mind
10 richest years of British history.
The hospitals are down to him. That bizarre thing where they borrow money from the city and they have to pay it back infinitum.
Well, look, Michael, you've summed the situation up perfectly. I'm not going to try and better it because I couldn't. Thanks very much indeed for your call. Well, we've certainly been around the political horizon today, and let's keep doing that. Roman in London wants to talk about Saudi Arabia. There are not many places on the airwaves where this kind of high-level political discussion is taking place. Roman, welcome.
Hi, George. How you doing?
I'm great, thanks. What would you like to say, sir?
I just want to comment that it's ironic. These people talk about, they're against ISIS, they want to kill those ISIS terrorists. Now, when they fund regimes like the Saudis, the Bahrainis, the Qataris, they are indirectly, many of your callers have already made this point, really, that they're indirectly funding these terrorist organizations. Now, the Saudi clan is a creation of the British Empire. The state of Israel is also a creation of the British Empire. Both of these regimes, they oppress people, they kill people, they murder them, and then they come up on all these media organizations, just putting sugar and icing on top and making it look like they are the ones.
They're the good guys, yeah.
Who are, basically the saviors.
Well, Saudi Arabia, Roman, Saudi Arabia has taken the precaution of buying the vast majority of Arab media, and that which is not owned by them is owned by the satrapies around them, who sing from the same hymn sheet, if you'll forgive the pun or mixed metaphor. And, of course, the power of both of the lobbies in support of both of these countries is fueled by people who have no commonality of religion with either country. Most of the supporters of Saudi Arabia are not Muslim, and most of the supporters of Israel are not Jews. They're supporting Saudi Arabia and supporting Israel for entirely different reasons. Roman, I've got to press on. Great call. Don't be a stranger. Andrew is in Motherwell in North Lanarkshire. Go ahead, Andrew.
Hi there, George. How you doing?
I'm good. Nice to hear from you. Go on.
Thank you. I was just phoning up to see if you'd seen the new John Pilger documentary.
I haven't, but I'm a big fan of John Pilger. Very big fan, and I encourage everyone to see it. I've not seen it yet. Is it good?
It was fantastic, but the behaviour of American foreign policy is absolutely disgusting. The people of Okinawa are prisoners in their own homes just now. I think their cause should certainly have a lot more limelight. And it's the same with the people of Jeju Island in South Korea.
Yeah, I see the South Korean people have overthrown their president today.
Have they?
Yeah.
Oh my God! So I've been awake for 48 hours with coursework, so I've missed most of
this
stuff.
The South Korean people, let's salute them, have in their millions moved the mountain of their corrupt president, who's now gone. So a big shout out for John Pilger's documentary, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Brilliant man, brilliant documentary, like yourself.
Thank you very much. I've got a documentary out too, Andrew. Do buy it for
I will
Christmas.
do, the Tony Blair.
Yeah, thanks, pal.
Absolutely, I will do.
Thank you
Thanks very much.
All the best. Let's hear from Norma in Bristol. Always a pleasure. Go ahead,
Hello.
Norma. Hi.
Well, that man just more or less said what I was going to ask you, because you said you haven't seen the John Pilger documentary.
No, I haven't been able to. I'm out.
Well,
I'm out promoting my own one.
I know you are, I know. But the thing is, it was so scary. I mean, it was brilliantly done, because he always does things brilliantly. But really, really, George, the Americans' cruel treatment of the Pacific, the people in the Marshall Islands, by dropping these post-war atom bombs. They've got military bases all over the Pacific. And honestly, the tensions between USA and China military are dreadful. And honestly, the conflict could happen. And the bully boys of America, you know, they just don't like the rise of China. And what he did show, which it was so scary, all of it was, if it does result in a nuclear war, I mean, we all know, or people don't know actually, that just this is the smallest bit. 10 years of complete darkness, millions of people dead. We've got to shout out against these weapons. You know, there's not enough shouting out about it. It's just the policy of fear and not for good things, really. It was awful, George, although it was very well done.
Now, the thesis of the film is that there's a coming world war with China, yeah? I mean, there is no doubt that much of America's foreign policy preoccupation is fixated on the rise of China. Yeah. China is now the biggest economy in the whole world. Yeah. It has the biggest armed forces in the whole world. It holds more US dollars than the US Treasury itself. And if it were to dump the US dollar, for example, say in favor of pounds, that would be a fine thing, but it would destroy the American economy overnight. So the United States is seeking always to weaken and encircle China, but it's doomed, isn't it? I mean, the United States is a failing power, and the sun rises in the east.
Yeah, I know. But if you saw all the bases and the horrendous things that they have done to the people in the Marshall Islands, and this is, some of it was right up-to-date stuff, you know, in place in Japan as well, where they're infiltrating.
Is this Okinawa?
Yeah, it was, wasn't it? Yeah, that's right. You really, really have to see it, because we've got to shout out. I mean, you've just got to say, you know, Mr. Corbyn's idea of not replacing Trident. Please, please, please listen, people, because do you want these horrendous things one day? And they might happen. You know?
Norma, thanks as always for your call. Andy O'Brien tweets, Corbyn wants to be leader of a protest group. Doesn't know how to hold the government to account. Well, I don't think that's true, Andy, and I said earlier, and I'll repeat it. Corbyn is now, every week, besting Theresa May. Now, I know about Parliament. I was at a very marvellous play last night in the Garrick in Charing Cross Road. I can't remember what it's called, This House, In the House, something like that. It is a depiction of the 1974 to 79 Parliament, which it did in perfect verisimilitude. It was a wonderful piece of writing, directing, and fantastic acting. If you get the chance to see it at the Garrick, then go and see it. And I'm bound to tell you, because I know about Parliament, I sat there for nearly 30 years. I know who's winning, who's losing, in terms of debates and holding to account government ministers, prime ministers. And Corbyn is beating Theresa May every single Wednesday. The problem is the media is not reflecting that. And the Corbyn camp have not yet found a way of getting that weekly triumph out there to a sufficient number of people. And secondly, that's all there is. All the rest is being sabotaged by these wreckers and saboteurs and traitors who are out again today after the by-election yesterday, more or less openly calling for Corbyn to go, blaming Corbyn, as if the last 15 or 20 years of Labour history had never happened. And there's nothing else. And Corbyn has not found the rhythm, the pulse, and on certain key questions, he's out of kilter with where the country is and should be. And the Brexit issue is the most important of those. I've been saying this from the morning of the referendum result. You can go to YouTube and see it. Labour should have grasped the decision and run with it, made it its own, and said, Article 50 now. And here's the kind of Britain that we will build if you elect us outside of the European Union. We, Labour, I say we, I'm not in Labour, but you know what I mean. We are the party that will build a new Britain, that will build a better Britain. That's what they should have said. Instead, they have been fannying around, fumbling around, appearing one day as one thing and another day as the next thing. Sometimes it's not even a day in between. So the public don't know. Is Labour for Brexit or is it against it? And is Labour laying out, in the way that Theresa May is not, the kind of Britain that we're going to have once we have left? And I don't know any way out of that. And this brings me to a point I'd like to make. There is a big controversy going on in an organisation called Momentum, with which I have no connection or association whatsoever. Momentum was founded by a man called John Landsman, for whom I have very little time. I have known him more or less all of our lives. We were both the friends of, the comrades of, the foot soldiers of the late and great Tony Benn. We were both involved in Mr. Benn's deputy leadership campaign in the early 1980s, when there was a chance to really change the Labour Party, and with a giant figure like Mr. Benn at our head. And I was not impressed by Mr. Landsman then, and I haven't been impressed by him since, and I'm not impressed by him now. But if you ask me to choose between John Landsman's version of Momentum and the ragbag of Trotskyite fragments that are seeking to take over Momentum with their tried, tested and failed methodology of the ultra-left in Britain for half a century or more, then I'm with Landsman. Because any idea that there can be any progress, any public support, any traction amongst the wider public gained by fusing together the fragments of schisms that took place between Stalin and Trotsky in the 1920s in another country is, by definition, you've just got to say it to realize how absurd it is. And these groups, particularly the so-called Alliance for So-Called Workers, So-Called Liberty, the AWL, are the vilest, the weirdest, the cultist, secretive gang of saboteurs and wreckers and provocateurs that I have ever known in a long life on the left. And they, a tiny group of a few score people, are trying to take over Momentum and trying to wrest it from Landsman's hands. So if you're in Momentum and you're listening to me, and you care about what I say and about my experience, don't be lured by the siren calls of these people onto the rocks of the kind of discredited ultra-leftism of these ragbag Trotskyist groups. I had a coffee with Jerry Springer once, in fact more than a coffee. I had a full set breakfast with Jerry Springer, and it wasn't in a Kentucky coffee shop, it was in the Dorchester Hotel, and it was at his invitation, and I found him to be an absolutely first-rate, top-class man, with a great political mind. He'd formerly been the mayor of Cincinnati, in fact, and wanted to go further in politics, but ran into one or two personal difficulties and became a multi-millionaire presenter of television programs and radio instead. Where did it all go wrong, Jerry? Here's Laura in London.
Yeah, hi, good evening, George.
And to you.
Thank you. I wonder if you can tell me, are MPs and councillors expected and obliged to publish which lobbyists they've met with or received communications from, and which lobbyists or corporations they've received funds or consultancies or bribes, legal bribes or otherwise, from? Where can we find this out about our councillors and MPs?
Well, I don't know about councillors, and I think that there must be some kind of regulation of them, but I do know about MPs. MPs have a register of members' interests, which is available online. You can consult your own MP's register at any time, and that tells you how much money they've earned from outside sources, how much hospitality they have accepted beyond a certain level. I mean, if somebody buys you a cup of tea, you don't have to register it, or even a full set breakfast, but you do have to register it when it reaches a certain point. So if someone takes you to Ascot, for example, you would need to register that, and who took you, and what the value of the trip was, and so on. But so far as it goes, that register is probably worth consulting, certainly worth having. Lords have a much laxer form of registration, far less scrutinised and far less rigorously policed.
Right.
And a lot of the lobbying goes on through the Lords, because in this crazy system of ours, Lords are members of Parliament, even though nobody elected them.
Yeah.
Nobody can remove them, but you can certainly buy them. And many, many, many have been bought. And if you can't buy them, you can certainly rent them. You can rent them like a London taxi to serve your interests. So corruption is rife in the British political system. And when I was a child, it was an article of faith that corruption was something other people did. Other countries were corrupt, but we were not. And to some extent, not wholly by any means, but to some extent that was true. But it isn't true now.
Well, thank you for that. The reason I asked this question was because it's glaringly obvious that rules, regulations, and policies are created that benefit that individual's wallet, their own wealth, when they receive these legal bribes or funds, but to the detriment of Britain or society, the community. And this is why I think it's vital that we all know who's seeing who and who's receiving any money in whatever form.
Well, amen to that, Laura. I entirely concur. It is an Augean stable. It needs cleansed. It will take a labour of Hercules to do it. But hey, you know Kirk Douglas is 100 today. Happy birthday to the great, great Kirk Douglas. You are Spartacus. Nobody else. You will always be Spartacus.